Today, we're going to talk about the role of Joseph Story in American constitutional history and the contributions he made. This episode focuses on English listening and looks at real stories from American constitutional history. Joseph Story, the architect behind the court. Joseph Story served as a justice of the U.S. Supreme Court from 1812 to 1845. People often remember him as part of the Marshall era, almost like a supporting character next to Chief Justice John Marshall. But in the long arc of American constitutional history, Story was far more than a helper. Marshall helped the court stand up and claim real authority. Story helped the court stand firm and keep that authority from fading when politics changed. If Marshall gave the Supreme Court a strong position, Story helped turn that position into a durable system, something that could keep working decade after decade. When Story joined the court, the country still faced a dangerous problem. That sounds technical, but was actually existential. The Constitution was written as a national framework, but the United States was also a union of states, with their own courts, laws, and political interests. If each state could interpret federal law in its own way, then the Constitution would not be a single national rule book. It would become a set of local versions, 50 different constitutions in practice. Story believed that a functioning constitutional system required one basic condition. When federal law and the Constitution are involved, the meaning cannot depend on which state you are in. A national constitution needs national interpretation, or it will slowly break apart. This belief shaped one of his most important opinions, Martin v. Hunter's Lessee, 1816. On the surface, the case was about a land dispute, but the true issue was deeper. Can the U.S. Supreme Court review and reverse state court decisions when those decisions involve federal law? Virginia's courts resisted federal review, which was not just a legal disagreement. It was a structural challenge to the idea of national supremacy. Story wrote for the court and argued in clear terms that the Supreme Court must have final authority in federal questions. Otherwise, federal law would mean one thing in one state and something else in another. In that world, the Constitution would lose its practical force. Story's opinion helped lock in a key rule of American federalism. State courts are powerful, but they cannot be the final judge of what the federal Constitution means. This point matters because constitutional power is not only about what the text says. It is also about who gets the last word when disputes happen. If state courts could block Supreme Court review in federal issues, then the national government would be weakened without any formal amendment. The Constitution would still exist on paper, but its authority would be negotiable in practice. Martin helped prevent that outcome. It made the Supreme Court's role real, not symbolic, and it helped ensure that the federal Constitution could operate as a single national system rather than a patchwork. Story also influenced the constitutional development of the national economy. During his time, the U.S. was moving toward a more integrated market. Trade, finance, and contracts increasingly crossed state lines. But state laws were not uniform, and legal uncertainty can function like a hidden tax. If businesses cannot predict what rules will apply, investment slows down and disputes multiply. In Swift v. Tyson, 1842, Story took a controversial approach. He argued that in certain commercial cases, federal courts did not always have to follow state common law decisions. Instead, they could apply broader, general, commercial principles to create more consistency. Later, this approach was overturned by the court in Erie Railroad v. Tompkins, 1938. And modern lawyers often focus on that reversal. But for constitutional history, what matters is the problem Story was trying to solve. He was pushing the court to take national legal predictability seriously, as part of national stability. Even when his specific doctrine did not survive, the underlying question remained: how can a federal system support a unified economy without being torn apart by conflicting local rules? Story's work shows that constitutional development is not only about rights and elections. It is also about building the legal infrastructure that makes a country function as one market and one nation. Story's influence becomes even more complicated and more revealing. When we look at slavery-related cases, this is where constitutional logic collided with the deepest moral and political crisis in American life. In Preg v. Pennsylvania, 1842, the court faced state laws that attempted to protect free black people and limit the capture of alleged fugitives. Story's opinion strongly defended federal supremacy in this area and struck down key parts of Pennsylvania's approach. From a structural constitutional view, he was enforcing the idea that states cannot nullify federal policy. But the real-world effect was explosive. The ruling intensified conflict between North and South and strengthened a legal process tied to human bondage. It shows a hard truth about constitutional power. A rule that protects national authority can also empower a national injustice. At the same time, Story's decision in the Amistad, 1841, shows a different side of his constitutional impact. In that case, Africans who had been kidnapped and illegally transported fought for their freedom. Story's opinion relied on treaties, international law principles, and careful fact-finding. He concluded that these individuals were not lawful property under the governing legal framework and should be freed. This did not end slavery, but it mattered as a signal of legal seriousness. The Supreme Court could still draw lines, demand evidence, and refuse to legitimize illegal acts, at least when the legal path allowed it. If Preg shows the danger of constitutional consistency being used to reinforce a brutal system, Amistad shows the court using law and proof to limit that brutality in a specific setting. These two cases together explain why Story cannot be reduced to a simple label. He was not merely pro-slavery or anti-slavery. He was a jurist whose deepest commitment was to constitutional structure, especially federal supremacy and national coherence. Sometimes that commitment pushed the court into morally ugly outcomes. Other times it created legal openings for liberty. The constitutional lesson is unsettling but important. The same structural principles can produce very different moral results, depending on the political system they operate inside. Story also shaped constitutional practice through areas that are less famous but deeply important, especially maritime law and federal jurisdiction. The United States was a trading nation, and shipping disputes cross borders by nature. If maritime rules were fragmented across states, commerce would become chaotic. Story supported the idea that maritime issues should fall under uniform federal principles. This helped strengthen a national legal order in fields where uniformity is not a luxury but a necessity. In constitutional terms, it was another way of reinforcing the idea that certain national functions require national rules and national courts. Beyond his judicial opinions, Story's long-term influence came from something even more powerful. He helped teach America what its Constitution meant. In 1833, he published commentaries on the Constitution of the United States. In the 19th century, this was not just a book. It functioned like a widely accepted guide to constitutional understanding. Story organized and explained constitutional principles in a structured, teachable way. He did not merely repeat the text. He showed how the Constitution was designed to work, why federal supremacy mattered, how judicial review fit into the system, and how the national structure could survive political conflict. This matters because constitutional development is not shaped only by judges in courtrooms. It is also shaped by how lawyers are trained, how arguments are framed, and what counts as a normal way to read the Constitution. Story was also a major figure in legal education, including at Harvard. Through teaching and writing, he helped build a shared constitutional language for American law. That shared language made the Supreme Court's authority easier to reproduce in later generations. In that sense, Story did not just decide cases. He helped build the mental framework that later judges used when they decided cases. If we step back, Story's role in American constitutional history becomes clear. He was not the person who created the Supreme Court's power from nothing. That was Marshall's central achievement. Story's contribution was different and, in some ways, just as necessary. He strengthened the court's ability to operate as the national interpreter of federal law. He reinforced the idea that the Constitution must have a uniform national meaning. He pushed for legal coherence in a growing national economy. He revealed in slavery cases how structural constitutional logic can both stabilize the system and intensify moral disaster. And through his writing, he helped turn constitutional principles into a lasting tradition. Joseph Story's legacy is not that he made the Constitution beautiful in theory. His legacy is that he helped make it workable in practice. He took a young constitutional machine and helped build the bolts, gears, and rules that kept it running. Without that kind of work, even the strongest constitutional ideas can become temporary. With it, a system can endure, sometimes in admirable ways, and sometimes in painful ways, but endure all the same.